Hey everyone, I'm Sam Gross from electricbikereport.com, and this is the Surface604 Werk. It's powered by a 500 watt rear hub motor, a sturdy welded rear rack that's going to be good for wherever you want to carry on it, and most notably it also sports a torque sensor, which makes this bike very responsive and very peppy. We're going to put this bike through a gauntlet of tests to see how it performs in the real world, so stay with us. So the Werk is an electric commuter bike with a utilitarian bend to it, and that's because of its welded rear rack. So Surface604 doesn't publish exactly how much weight this rack can handle, but we feel very confident that it's going to be able to handle quite a bit, and that's because it's not attached via bolts, it's actually part of the frame, which makes it much sturdier, much stouter to place items on. In addition to that, this bike has a mid-step frame, which is going to be a little bit easier to get on. This one is a size large, it's 19 inch. It's going to fit someone as tall as me, like a 6'1" person, but someone who might be shorter can also probably get on this bike very easily. It's powered by a Bafang 500 watt rear hub motor, and this is a motor that we are fairly familiar here with Electric Bike Report. It produces 65 Newton meters of torque, and it's something that we found to be very peppy. It's got a lot of spring in its step. It's a good 500 watt unit. But most notably, what sets this bike apart from some of the other bikes in its class is it actually features a torque sensor, and that torque sensor is located in the derailleur hanger. It's actually what the derailleur attaches to and what the wheel attaches to in the rear. And what that torque sensor is going to do over something like a cadence sensor, it's going to be extremely responsive to your pedaling. Cadence sensors, they pick up your rotation of the crank. They're not going to be able to actually tell how much force you're putting into the bike. Torque sensors do. They actually operate off of how much force you are putting into the cranks at any given time, and that gives you a very measured amount of power relative to how you're pedaling. So this bike is going to be, it's going to feel like a normal bicycle when you pedal it. When you pedal hard, it's going to give a lot of power, and when you pedal lightly, it's going to give a little bit of power. So it's a really cool and unique riding experience, especially at this price point of around $2,500 MSRP, give or take a little bit. So to get an idea of how this upgraded 20 amp hour batteries perform in the real world, we put it to the test in a series of range tests. The first of these was on PAS1, so the bike's lowest pedal assist level, and the second was on PAS5, so the bike's highest pedal assist level. And on PAS1, this bike went for 61.31 miles, which is very far. And on PAS5, this bike went for 45.88 miles. And that actually represents a record. Out of all of the PAS5 tests we've ever done at Electric Bike Report, this bike has gone the furthest so far in its highest pedal assist level. So aside from setting that record, there is one more thing I'd like to point out about this bike's range test performance. And that is what happened in the PAS1 test. So typically in PAS1, we're seeing mile per hour averages at about 11, 12, maybe 13 miles an hour on the higher end of the spectrum. The moral of the story is PAS1 typically doesn't give you very much energy at all. That's why we see these bikes going so far. This bike went much faster. On PAS1, our average was a little bit over 15 miles an hour, which is exceptionally quick for a bike that went that long, over 61 miles. And exceptionally quick for a bike on its lowest pedal assist level. We've never seen it. It's the quickest by a margin of a couple miles per hour. So really impressive range test result from this bike. It's going to be safe to say that if you're wanting to go far, this is a bike you can trust to do that, especially with that upgraded battery option. That's why I would probably suggest to do it. It's a $300 investment, and that's actually not a lot of money for a battery this large. Usually when you're going to a battery that size, you're seeing much more money to do that. So great range test result. So to get an idea of how well the Surface604 Werk goes uphill, we've brought it out to our test hill hellhole, where we're going to put it up the hill against the clock twice. The first time we're going to do it on throttle only, and the second time we're going to do it on PAS5 with the maximum assist plus the help of my legs. And those two tests together are going to give us an idea of the climbing performance of this e-bike. Now, hellhole is a third of a mile long. It's a 12% gradient on average with several pitches that go much steeper than that. So this is going to be a hill that is long enough and steep enough that should put this 500 watt rear hub motor to the test. Though Bafang's rear hub motors make 65 Newton meters of torque, so I do have a lot of faith that this bike's gonna make it up the hill just fine, but let's put it against the clock and see how it does. All right, so this is the throttle only test for the Surface 604 Werk up our test hill hellhole. Hitting the max speed, the bottom of that hill, and now just plugging our way up. So this Bafang 500 watt Bafang motor makes 65 Newton meters of torque, which is a good amount of torque. And we're seeing that torque on display right now through one of the longer, steeper sections of hill, and it's doing good work through it. We are going fairly fast. Speed's dropping a little bit through the hardest section of the hill. Through that, I'm going to start regaining speed again on this flatter part. There's one more steep pitch. That is the most frequent place we see these bikes die, especially the 500 watt rear hub motors, but I have a good feeling this one's going to make it. Here we go into that hard section, about 20 feet from the top of it, down to 5. Oh yeah, we got it. Almost the top. We're home free. Okay. So this is the PAS5 test on the Surface 604 Werk, which is definitely going to be interesting considering this 500 watt motor here is controlled by a torque sensor, which makes it super responsive to the amount of energy I'm putting into it. And boy, oh boy, are we seeing this thing perform nicely right now. So through the longest steep section, definitely feel my heart rate go up, but not terribly. Everything feels measured, very responsive. Starting to cycle through gears. And that's it. So as we had guessed, the Surface 604 Werk went up hellhole just fine. In the throttle only portion of the test, it made it up in 1 minute and 53 seconds with an average speed of 9.6 miles an hour. And then on PAS5, it made it to the top in 1 minute 11 seconds with an average speed of 15.3 miles an hour. Both of those results are really, really awesome results from a bike with a 500 watt rear hub motor, especially for a bike that's as large as this one. And I do largely credit that 500 watt rear hub motor. It is incredibly torquey. 65 Newton meters is definitely on the upper end of the spectrum we typically see from a 500 watt rear hub motor. But in addition to that, it also is going to be partially due to that torque sensor. So I obviously try to not pedal super hard up this hill. I do try and pedal at a moderate pace, but this motor, because of that torque sensor, was able to give a really awesome and equal and measured amount of power per how hard I was actually pedaling the bike. So it felt super responsive, and if I did need to give it a little bit of gas to get up a steeper section, the motor responded in time. So really awesome result from the Werk on our test hill, and let's move on to the next thing. So the Werk comes with a fairly standard cockpit of what we'd expect from a bike at this price point. It's got the Bafang full color LCD display, and that obviously pairs really nicely with the 500 watt Bafang rear hub motor. And controlling that display and the motor is a touchpad on the left-hand side. That touchpad has 2 buttons on it to control your PIS settings, and then buttons to turn the bike on and off, cycle through some of the different displays, and then also control your front headlight. You've also got a thumb throttle on the left-hand side as opposed to a twist-style throttle. I actually prefer the thumb throttle over the twist. That's a personal preference. You may feel different, but I like it. Handling-wise, this is a fairly nice handling electric commuter. It's a large bike. It comes in at about 19.5 inches. 19 inches, not 19.5. Surface604 calls this a medium-large frame. It fits someone my size very nicely, and I'm 6'1" tall with long legs. I have no problem fitting on this bike and handling it. If you're a shorter person, that mid-step frame is going to be your friend, allowing you to get on and off of it a little bit easier, and then you also have a lot of adjustment in the seat post. It is a large bike, meaning that it's just in tight corners, it's going to be a lot to turn. I haven't had a ton of problem with it, but just something to keep in mind. It's got a longer wheelbase on it. It also has this 80mm SR Suntour front suspension fork to dampen out the road vibrations and kind of take the edge off of any bumps in the road. But there is one thing I do want to note about this bike's handling. It's one of my few gripes with this bike. It does suffer from a very small amount of understeer in very tight situations. Like, for example, if I were to pull a U-turn in the path that I'm standing on or go around a switchback. If you're cornering in a neutral position, so just kind of how the bike has you set, and you go and use your handlebars quite a bit, you're gonna feel the front end want to push a little bit or even catch. That's what we call understeer. It's not a huge issue. It's not something I've ever had to keep in mind at high speeds or going around like kind of your typical sweeping corner, but it is something I've noticed when I'm like turning around on a path, going around a switchback. It's not a huge deal. You can counteract this by moving your body around on the bike, but it is something to keep in mind. This bike also rolls on 27.5-inch wheels that help it feel a little bit more snappy. Smaller wheels tend to accelerate quicker, and they also have a nice quick handling profile. All in all, I really enjoyed riding this bike. That one gripe I point out about understeer, that's me being nitpicky. It's my job to review bikes, so I have a really sensitive eye to stuff like that. But it's not something that you're probably going to notice all that often in your everyday use of this bike. But all in all, it's a good handling and nice riding e-bike. So Surface604 spec'd the Werk with a set of Tektro Auriga disc brakes with 180mm rotors front and rear. These are hydraulic disc brakes. They should be plenty powerful to stop this bike in a short distance, but we're going to put that to the test today to see how it stops in the real world. How we're going to do that is we're going to take the bike up to 20 miles an hour 5 times and do 5 full power stops, take the average of all of those stops, and that is our average stopping distance. So let's see how the Werk and its brakes stand up in the real world. So as we'd expected, and as you can expect from really any Tektro branded hydraulic disc brake, this bike came to a stop in 16 feet and 11 inches, which is just a little bit longer than our current average braking distance of all the bikes we've reviewed, which is about 16 feet 3 inches or 16 feet 4 inches, somewhere in that ballpark. So this is still a good performance from this bike, but there is one note I'd like to make. It does like to skid, and that's going to be a factor of these Kenda Quick semi-slick tires. There were some times where I was able to throw my weight back up and throw it low enough that I could control the skid, but that skid is part of why this bike did stop right around average and didn't go better than that average. But still a good braking distance. We are always satisfied with bikes that do our average stopping distance. Lots of bikes have stopped in that ballpark, so good job from the Werk. So the Bafang 500 watt rear hub motor that comes on this bike is a tried and true unit that we really have a lot of faith in. It produces 65 Newton meters of torque, which is on the higher end of the spectrum of torque output that we would expect from a 500 watt rear hub motor. It's one of the reasons why we like this unit so much. But you pair that power with that torque sensor and you get a bike that is incredibly responsive. It's going to do a really fantastic job of mimicking the rider's pedaling, and it does give you another spectrum of control over the bike other than just adjusting your pedal assist settings. But to get an idea of how the bike performs in each of those pedal assist settings, we did put it to the test on our circuit. And how we did this is we did one lap around the circuit for each of the 5 pedal assist settings, and then another lap with the motor entirely off. And what this does is it gives us a sampling of the power profile, and it also gives us an idea of what a hot lap on this bike would look like. So, in PS5 going about as fast as it'll go. And it also gives us an idea of how efficient the bike is to pedal with no motor at all, which is going to help the bike on its range, it's going to help the bike on its speed, and it just feels better and more intuitive to pedal. This bike did great on all fronts. It put up a hot lap on our circuit at about 19 miles an hour, I think a little bit more than that, which is very close to this bike's Class 2 maximum motor assisted speed of 20 miles an hour. And then in addition to that, it also does pedal nicely with the motor off. It's not a spectacularly high average speed around our course, but it does feel good. I didn't feel like I was winded or really having to overwork or push a lot of weight or big fat tires around. It's a nicely efficient bike, which probably also contributed to its good results in our range test. There is one thing I will note about this torque sensor though. So while torque sensors are generally accepted as superior to cadence sensors because they are more sensitive, they're going to do a better job of mimicking a rider pedaling, etc., you do have to put some input into the bike from your legs. This is not a bike where you can just kind of soft pedal the cranks and the motor is going to whisk you away at 20 miles an hour. This bike does want you to work a little bit. Not a ton, but just enough so it knows how much power it wants to deliver at any given time. This is a Class 2 e-bike, or at least it ships as a Class 2 e-bike. Surface604 does say it is ready to be upgraded to a Class 3 setting, so maxed out at 28 miles an hour instead of 20. But because we did most of our testing on the bike paths here in southern Utah, we kept it as a Class 2 setup. And I personally would suggest you do the same thing as well. Not only is that a little bit safer in pedestrian areas, but it does seem to suit the power profile of this 500 watt motor very, very nicely. It did never feel like the bike was strained to go near that max speed, and it did keep a nice high average speed when I was out testing it. So overall, a really great performance so far from that Bafang rear hub motor and the bike's power. If you're in the market for a high-end yet still affordable electric commuter bike, the Surface604 Werk is one I'd highly suggest you take a look at. Over the course of our testing, we've been really impressed with that 500 watt rear hub motor and its ultra-sensitive torque sensor. We've also been impressed with that nicely appointed 9-speed drivetrain and then that class-leading range, or at least a class-leading range if you choose to do that 20 amp hour battery upgrade. This bike does cost a couple $100s more than some of the other bikes in that affordable electric commuter category. But if you can spend that extra cash, if you're looking for a bike that does feel like it's making a little bit more of a difference over its competitors, it might be worth spending that couple $100s more. It's really hard to undersell how much a nicely appointed 9-speed drivetrain that shifts better and has more gear ratios to choose from, and how much difference that torque sensor is going to make in the long run. It is a really nice riding bike for really just not that much more money than some of the other electric commuters in its affordable category. We've really enjoyed testing the Surface604 Werk. It's been a very impressive bike. We did note one small gripe with the handling characteristics, but I do want to stress this is not something you're going to feel often, and it's not something that I feel is going to be a problem in your everyday riding experience. And quite frankly, whenever it does pop up, it's at very low speeds when you're pulling U-turns, and it's something that's very easy to correct for. But if you've enjoyed this bike like we've enjoyed testing it, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you want to learn more about it, click the link in the description below this video for more in-depth review with all of the data we recorded on the Surface604 Werk. For Electric Bike Report, I'm Sam Gross. Thank you so much for watching.